Hello, my name's Brenda and I'm a guest tutor from Melton City Council, and as part of the Melton City Learning Directory, today I'm going to be bringing you learning how to knit. First things first, we're going to start with yarn. Now it's called yarn and not wool because yarn can be made of various things. This is actually 100% wool. This is a blend, and this is pure wool. This is also a blend, and so is this. Now this little beauty is made up of mohair, wool and cotton. Yarn also comes in different weights, or what we call ply. So starting with this one, which is very, very fine, it's a 4-ply. And what that means is 4 strands are actually wound together to make this fine yarn. This is another yarn. It's also called sock yarn. So this is slightly thicker than that or slightly heavier. This is 8-ply, and this is a small ball, about a 50-gram ball. And this one is the same ply, but it's a 200-gram ball. And then we've got this really pretty thing, which has got lots of little fibres off of it. When you're starting to knit, you will need to actually get the right size needles. Now needles can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and different materials. You can either have metal needles, as you can hear very noisily, plastic needles, timber needles, and they're even in bamboo. It's all about personal choice, so whatever you prefer to use. I'll be using plastic ones today for less noise to do our demonstration. Each label on your yarn will have a list of information, and that includes how much this weighs. This is a 50-gram ball. This is a 200-gram ball. So if you're going to make something that needs 200, you'll need 4 of these. It also tells you care instructions, so when you finished your garment, how to look after it. It also has average meterage or yards. In some patterns it will tell you you will need so many yards or metres. So if you need a specific amount, make sure you read your label. You don't want to run short at the end of your project. It has the needle size, and it also has a tension information. Now tension really is about how tight do you knit or how loose. And they suggest you do a tension square. It's not always necessary unless you're doing a garment that's going to be fitted and you want to make sure it's not too small or too large. Today we're not going to worry about that, but if you do need to check your tension, just do a little tension square. You can always pull it undone and use the yarn later. Right, to start with the basics, we're going to take our 8-ply yarn and we're going to learn to cast on. I tend to pull the wool or yarn from the centre of the ball, and that's really so it doesn't roll around and become tangled. If you're not comfortable with doing it, that's fine. Then I suggest just pop it into a bag so it doesn't, 1, get dirty, 2, get too tangled, and you don't lose it under the furniture or something like that. You might notice I'm sitting in a chair without arms. I just find it's a little bit more comfortable when you're knitting not to have the restriction of arms on your chair. Right, some other things that you may need while you're knitting is one of these. It's a needle gauge, and the reason I use this is some of my needles are quite old. They're not in millimetres, they are actually in what they call UK or US sizes. Tape measure, either in inches or millimetres, depending again on your pattern, what you need, but a handy little tool. And this is what we call a row tally. This allows you to keep count of where you actually are in your pattern. And these little knobs at either end of your little barrel here turn and indicate what row you're on. And then it's just a matter of popping it through the centre, and it sits on the end of your needle so you don't lose it. We don't need that today, but just to show you. Now, because the needles come in various sizes, and we're going to be, like I say, checking your label for your needle size. On this one it says we need a 4mm needle. Now this one has worn its number off, so I don't really know. I've got an idea it's an 8 Oh, yeah, it is. It's an 8. So it goes right through my little thing. Now on here it says an 8 on one side, but on the other side it tells me it's millimetres. So it's a 4 millimetre needle. This one actually has it written on the end of the needle here. It does actually say 4 millimetres. And if I pop it through there, you can see it actually fits through the 4 millimetre hole. If it doesn't go through the top one, which is a 3 3/4 millimetre, you know that's not right. It actually has to go right through the hole. This is the same thing, and this actually has 4 millimetres on the end, but if it's a bit difficult to read, not sure, pop it through, yes, that's the same size. Now this has got a number 8. Now that's an English size needle, and I know that that will actually go through. But if you didn't know and you popped it through your 8, you go, oh, that is a 4 millimetre. If you've got a pattern that says an 8 size needle, then you can do it the other way around. If it says 4 millimetre on your needle, you can figure out what size it is. Now, as you can see, needles go right up to a very large size. Tend to not use those. This one's probably the thickest you'll use, which is a 6 millimetre needle, and that's for a 10 or 12 ply wool. We talked about our yarns and different plies, and today we're going to be using an 8 ply, so that's our 4 millimetre needle. Now, just a little bit of a tail, we're going to do a slip knot. So it's a matter of making a loop, doing a twist, and then we're going to pull the yarn through. Okay, so that will actually reduce in size. I'll just do that again. So you just make a loop, give it a bit of a twist, and then you're going to put your fingers through and thumb and pull the loop through. We're going to pop this onto our first needle. Here we go. As you can see, it is a slip knot, and that will give you a nice neat finish at the end. Okay, what we're going to do, we're taking, now I'm a right-handed knitter, so I apologise to all the lefties. We're putting our right-hand needle into our stitch. We're going to take the yarn under the needle and around. We're going to pull the loop through, and we're going to pop that stitch onto the needle. Now, as you can see, this has got a bit loose again. We're just going to tighten that up. Now, we've got 2 stitches. I like to knit between the 2 stitches, so just put your needle in between those 2, under the needle and round, and bring your loop through and pop it onto the left-hand needle. And continue on, same way, through between the 2 stitches, underneath, around, bring your loop up and back onto here. Some people like to just knit straight into the stitch and do that. Same way, just keep knitting into the next stitch, increasing each way. The only thing I don't like about that, you tend to get a bit of a loose and not quite a firm, neat finish. So my preferred method is to go between the stitches. This isn't the only method of casting on, there are several other ways, but this is probably the most basic and easiest to remember of the methods of knitting. Right, so what we need to do for our scarf today, because it's an 8 ply wool, we'll want about 30 to 35 stitches. So I'm just going to quickly put all these stitches on. I'm not going to do 35, I'll just do enough today to show you how we're going to progress. Okay, and there we go. So quickly count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I might just do another. It doesn't matter how many stitches exactly, you can work on how wide you want it to be. Now, if you look at that, it's actually about 15 centimetres. Oh no, 7. So if I want you to do it wide enough to do one of these, that's about 13. So I'm about halfway, so I'll need to do double that amount of stitches. And I suppose that's really what you need to work out, is how wide do you want your scarf. So depending on the type of product you're using, you can either do a narrow one like this, a slightly wider one like this, or an even wider one like this. And we'll come back to those in a moment. So what we're going to do now is continue on in what we call garter stitch. Now it's the same thing as knitting into your stitch. Instead of this time, we're not going to create one, we're actually going to take that off and drop it off the needle. Don't get scared, this is how it works. So you pop your needle into the front of the stitch, you take your yarn underneath and around the needle, and you're bringing that loop up. But this time you're taking that stitch off the left-hand needle. So in the front, yarn underneath, around the point, bring the loop up through and take that stitch off. And continue on through, round, and take the loop off. And do this all the way to the end of your row. Now this is what we call the knit stitch, and often you'll see in patterns it's just represented by the letter K. You'll also see the letter P for pearl, and that's just doing what we call stockinette stitch. But today we're actually going to just be doing garter stitch. Okay, so we've got to the end of our row, and we're going to turn around and change from left to right with our needles, and we're going to do exactly the same thing again. So into the front of the stitch, underneath, round the needle, pull off that stitch. Into the front, underneath and round, and pull off that stitch. And you'll get really quick at doing this. And it's just the same stitch all the way through, and that is what knit is, or garter stitch. So you're knitting every stitch the same way in every row. And this grows quite quickly, especially if you've got very thick, bulky yarn, like this purple 12 ply. Okay, here we go. So now we've got 2 rows happening. And once again, we go back into our stitch, and you continue on until you get the length of the scarf that you want. Depending on what you want, you can either have a short scarf that just flips over you and around your neck, or one that wraps round and round and round. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so I'm just going to pop that down now, and as you can see, we've done 2 rows, and it's growing quite nicely. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to actually have a look at completing your scarf. Now this one here, as you can see, is a nice long scarf, and it's made with a 12 10 ply wool, and we're knitting with 6mm needle, so it's quite bulky. This is all done in garter stitch, so as you can see, it's just row upon row of the same stitch, and you've got this nice sort of ridged line. Now when you get to the end, rule of thumb is if you've only got this much wool, you go, have I got enough to finish? Make sure this is all spread out nicely, and count 1, 2, 3, 4. That should finish it off. If it doesn't, we're in trouble, but let's have a go. So we're going to do casting off, which is very similar to the knitting. Same thing, you go into the front of your stitch, yarn underneath, and you take it off. Do the same as the next stitch, so now you've got 2 stitches on your right hand needle. Taking your left hand needle, we're going to go under your first stitch, and we're going to put it over the top. I'll do that again. We're going to knit into the stitch, yarn around onto here, and we're going to take that first stitch and we're going to pop it over the top. So now we've got this edge here, and this is completing our work. This is casting off. So into your needle, into your stitch, and over the top. And you do this all the way to the end of the row. So 2 stitches, take the first over the second, knit the next one on. Over the top, next one on. And as you can see, we've got this nice little ridge happening here, so it really finishes off your project nicely. Okay, let's keep going to the end of the row. So these needles are a bit on the long side. Now when you're using something like a 12 or 10 ply, which this wool is, or yarn, no, this is actually pure wool, it will knit up fairly quickly. So I usually find my very first project, do something like this that's not too taxing and it grows quickly. You get a real sense of satisfaction and also that you've achieved something. Not only that, being nice and thick, it's going to be very, very warm. And for us beautiful Melbourne winters, you might need this. Beautiful thing about wool, it breathes, so it's unlike a synthetic. It's a natural fibre and it doesn't become too hot. And the beauty about taking things off. A scarf is easy to take on or off. Well, we're getting close to the end here, folks. Do you think we're going to have enough yarn? Fingers crossed. My mum used to say, if you knit faster, you won't use up as much wool. Oh, look at this. We're getting close. Almost done. Now, don't worry about the end. If you've got a little piece, we will be darning that in or sewing that in to the end. Or if you like, you can even create a fringe and using that end piece. Oh, look at this. We're just about out of yarn and we're just about at the... Oh, I've dropped a stitch. See, even people like me who knit all the time drop stitches. Another thing I would suggest too, as you're progressing through your scarf, every now and again count to make sure you've got enough stitches. Sometimes they tend to drop off or they increase all by themselves. Don't know how that happens. But yeah, just every now and again count. And look at that, folks, just enough yarn to finish it off. So there we go. So that's it. One completed scarf. There we go. And like I say, you can darn these in, or if you've got enough left over, or you want to use a contrast, you can put a fringe on the end. This is all done in garter stitch. Like I said, this is a 10 to 12 ply. This is the same design, all garter stitch, but this is done in an 8 ply. And as you can see, it's quite different. This is quite a soft, loose. This is quite firm and tight. And this is the same thing again, but using yet another yarn. This is a texture one, or what we call feathered. So it's the same thing. This is a little bit more stretchy, but it's all the same stitch. And just shows you how different effects can be achieved using different yarns. There we go, completed a scarf. Well, thank you for joining us today on Learning to Knit. Hope you've got something out of this. If you ever want to come down to Caroline Springs at all, we run out of Stevenson's house. We're part of the Spring Stitches group. We meet twice a month on the 2nd and 4th Thursday of the month. And the council actually runs what we call a More Time for Stitching afternoon. Run on a Saturday afternoon from 12 till 4. So have a look on the council learning directory. They will probably have some information there. And if you want to come down and brush up on some knitting, learn some new knitting stitches, how to make another garment, feel free. I'll be there. And some of the ladies are also popping in to just have a chat and a cup of tea. So hopefully we'll see you there, and good luck with your knitting.